pulmonary arterial pressure is 25 millimeter of Hg. We will see in detail in the pulmonary hypertension topic in this session. But by low pressure, you need to understand that the arteries in the pulmonary system have a thin wall, has a low resistance. That's why the pressure overall is low. Now, if I ask you about why you think the pulmonary arterial pressure is low, or this system has a low pressure as compared to systemic pressure or normal systemic artery pressure. So what do you think, why it is low? What is the reason behind it? Can anybody see exchange of gases? Yeah, definitely exchange of gases. But before exchange of gases, you need to understand that the lung has to expand to inhale air, to take in air from the environment. So consider that if the lung is expanded and if arteries have a high pressure, so there is a much more chances that it will actually first of all, it will increase the pressure, right? It increases the pressure within the artery, and it has a very lethal consequences. We will see and we will discuss in the later slides in the hypertension section of the pulmonary hypertension sections. But even right now, you can imagine lung has to expand, and in that capacity the pressure inside is increased. The pressure present inside is already increased, so it's naturally has a very low pressure, so that in case when we inhale the air and itself the pressure is increased, so it doesn't affect it and homeostasis is maintained, right? So this is a very common thing. I think it's a revision kind of thing, and I hope everyone is well versed with this, that we have a right atrium which actually taken all the deoxygenated blood, it goes to the right ventricle, and where it delivered to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. So everyone and is well known that the pulmonary artery carries the deoxygenated blood, then it's turned here, it's oxygenated, and finally it comes back to the ventricle, left ventricle, via pulmonary veins which carry the oxygenated blood, and from the left ventricle it's supplied to the rest of the body. Now the next slide is actually show you or make you recall from where the bronchitis arises and supply the parenchyma or elder unit of the lung. So we have the lower thing you did, but number one thing what you need to remember is the thin wall vessels. So if you see what is the constituent, definitely lined by the endothelium cells, right? And after the endothelium, we have an elastic fiber, and then we have, which is known as internal elastic fibers, and then we have a coat of muscular layer, right? And then with the external elastic fibers, and finally we have a serosa. So this is the constituent of vessels in which intima, media, and the outer surface is there. And this is basically the thin wall vessel is actually this part. Those vessels which have a high resistance, right? You can recall the name of the high resistance. For example, let's part of the vessel, or the medium or the muscle or the smooth muscle layers in the vessel of the systemic circulation is quite high in order to maintain the resistance and flow of blood. But in the pulmonary artery, this medial, or you can say the smooth muscle constituent of the artery is very thin. That actually leads to overall system or overall low pressure system in the pulmonary arteries, right? So now you can think why we are just focusing and why we are just digging down into this. So the reason behind is, and you can also imagine if it has a low pressure system or it has a low resistance, so you can imagine that the chances of atherosclerosis or thrombus formation within this system or within the pulmonary artery is very low, right? So if you go and just revise the things, okay, how the thrombus formation takes place, you come across it will form in the high resistance vessels, right? Obviously, the other factors do constitute in it, but the main reason why the thrombus is formed and how the thrombus is formed, we are not going to discuss in thrombus formation in this lecture, but definitely if you have query, we will encounter in the end of the session and we will discuss it. But here you can understand that because of the thin vessel and the low resistance, the chances of atherosclerosis is very low. Although it do have chances, but it's a very low chances of presenting atherosclerosis. So when there is a low chances, so you can think okay, how the embolus formation take place here. So by definition, embolus is basically some thrombus which is actually carried by blood to the site of the or the distant site away from the point of origin. The definition of thrombus, if we mark the definition of thrombus, what is the definition of thrombus? So it's a thrombus, sorry, embolus definition is a thrombus which actually carried by the blood to the site distant from its point of origin, right? Moving clot. We will come to it. What is the difference between the clot and this? You can guess in the very loose terms, you can say it's a clot, but clot terminology usually we used, and there's a difference also after a death. When okay, let's discuss what is if you need to differentiate between a clot and the thrombus, or you can say embolism. What is the difference? A clot and a embolism, we can say. What is the difference? See, the difference is that usually if some patient is died, right, and we have examined a pulmonary system and we come across a clot, for example, so we were suspecting, or if we need to identify the cause of death, so we need to establish, is it embolism that actually causing him to die, or it's a clot formation occur, which is a usual consequence or a usual thing occur after a death. See, blood will clot after death, right? And it will clot in the body, right? As a consequence of degradations and other things which happen after death, right? So the only clue or the only hint to differentiate between them is a histological examination, and where if we examine under a microscope, we found the line of Zehn. Line of Zehn are the nothing but the demarcation area in the layers of embolus, or you can say thrombus. However, in clot, there is no line of Zehn. Z-A, I don't know why my pointer is actually not helping me out. Okay, use pen. So the line of Zehn is the Z-A-H-N. Line of Zehn is a basic difference key which actually differentiate between a clot and embolism. So whenever you are talking about patient, so always use the term embolism or a thrombus formation. So we have discussed that thrombus is not formed. Usually thrombus is not formed. It can be formed, but usually it's not formed, and that's because the pulmonary arterial system has a low resistance. And second thing is that most of the time, 95%, I don't remember exactly, but it is written in the Robbins that 95% or somewhat around 90% of this disease is because of the embolus, which are actually originated from the thrombus formation in the deep veins of the leg. So we are coming to that, the risk factors and the what are the different type from where the thrombus is actually coming in the pulmonary system. But here you need to know the definition, and because most of the time it's usually skipped. So just remember, thrombus is something which is, or in very easy word, thrombus is a dislodged, embolus is a dislodged thrombus. So I'm myself confused. So embolus is a dislodged thrombus, or in easy word, embolus is a thrombus which actually carried by the blood to the side distant from its point of origin. That means from where it is originated, it just carried away by the blood to some other site. I hope you got it. And you also know, I suppose you know, there are three types of embolus: solid, liquid, and gas. We're not going itself in a thrombus pathophysiology, but we are discussing emboli related to the pulmonary system. So 90% originated from the thrombi, and it can be either arterial or venous, right? Okay, one thing I need you to understand that by definition, if we see arteries carry a blood, obviously it's have a you can say arterial thrombus is actually arising from the heart, and the venous thrombus majority arises from the leg vein. So one can think, okay, why, see, if you think in this way, from the leg vein, for example, the thrombus is formed in the leg vein, and from the leg vein, the blood is going towards the heart, right, for oxygenation, right? If the thrombus is forming here and somehow it dislodged from the vein, so can anybody tell me why it go downward, why it always go upward? Valve, excellent, excellent. So there are valve. Number one thing is a valve, blood flow in that direction, obviously. Number one thing is the blood flow in that direction, it dislodge and go there. And secondly, there are valves situated in the vein also, which actually help them to propel that and doesn't goes in the retrograde fashions. Although the factor of gravity, you can say the gravity, and because vein also have a low pressure, so as compared to the artery, if we're talking about, so they do have an effect of gravity, flow of blood and the valve present in the vein. This thrombus is actually, and 95% of the time goes towards the heart. Okay, so I hope this is clear for you. So we have discussed about what is embolism, the definition of embolism, which is actually simply a dislodged thrombus, and it can be of various type, fat, air, but most of the time, and I just told you that 95% of the time it is because of the thrombus which are originated from the deep veins of leg. Now, this is important, and I want you to just have a look on this. I think there's a problem with my pointer. I don't know why. So this picture is important anyhow. So this is the femoral vein basically, and in the femoral vein, the blood clot form in the vein and break free wall form. So instead of clot, they should use a thrombus because we have just discussed. So here it travel into the inferior vena cava, and embolus travel through the bloodstream to the heart, and within the heart, they have shown you the picture, embolus travel through the heart and the blood vessels in the lung. I think it's all what we have just reviewed. So just for the revision, that the embolus is actually form in the lower deep veins of leg, and it will travel through the vena cava into the right atrium, into the right ventricle, and then here from the pulmonary system. Now, so from the pulmonary systems here, clinically, if we see, so there are two type of dislodging of embolus. One in the periphery. So multiple, are you able to see these black color spots? So these are the dislodged embolus, which are tiny, and they go and settle down in the periphery or very small arterioles. And basically the big thrombus is actually lodged into a large branch, which affect the large branch and which affect the large areas. If clinically we are talking about, so these tiny emboli are usually silent, and they usually presented as a minor chest pain and with fever, but this is the very lethal, this actually the lethal consequences. So moving on to another category, which is actually just we discussed that the most of the thrombi or most of the embolism are actually arises from the DVTs, deep vein thrombosis, and they come up and dislodge into the pulmonary system, and the size is also depending on the size. Main pulmonary artery is encountered. So if it's a large emboli, so main pulmonary artery is actually blocked. However, if it's a small one, then it goes in the periphery, and most of the time it's clinically silent. So frequently there are multiple emboli, and this we have actually discussed. So I think we moving to this picture. I'm not seeing your chat box. So this is very important because this slides usually comes in your exam, and there's one special category which is actually or terminology which is given to that. First of all, you need to establish what is it. It's a very high power view, so if somebody is seeing for the first time, you will not be able to appreciate it. But I'll just help you. What is it? This is an open artery, right? If you open an artery, if you bisect an artery, so this is the covering of an artery. See, this is a lumen, and within the lumen, there's a one black colored things which actually clotted blood. If you see first time, you say this is a clotted blood. If I say this is a lumen of the artery, and what is it? So you can say this is a clotted blood, or in another way, this is a thrombus, right? So in the one point of time, you cannot judge this is a thrombus or emboli. But as we are discussing about the pulmonary system, so we assume that this is a pulmonary parenchyma, and this is the pulmonary artery, and this is something which is not attached. See, if it is attached, it does not look like a luminal thing. If it is attached, it look like this. If it is attached to the vessel wall, so it look like this. It will grow in this direction. However, it's actually look like that it is going in this way or in this way. So this is an embolism, and the specific embolism which dislodge or trapped in the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery, it takes a shapes of this S shape. So it is known as a saddle emboli. So we can call it a saddle emboli. The picture is from the basis, and you can go and read the caption and read the things. It's nothing but just a name is given because it's shapes like a S. So not S, but a saddle. Saddle is like a horse seat. So it's just like a saddle. So the name is given. I don't know why. I don't think it look like saddle, but the way it is written. So It is nothing but a dislodged emboli within the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery. So go and just have a view of this picture, because it usually comes in your exams. And after asking what is it and why it's it, they used to ask what are the different risk factors of embolus formations, or the definition of emboli, or the types of emboli. So first you need to identify this. So this is a very unique picture. So I understand it's very hard to just identify on a one go, but see this picture, because you're sparing time here. So just look at the picture. This is a saddle thrombus, and whenever it comes in exam, I hope you will be able to label that. So till now, I guess we have done definition of emboli. We have discussed deeply why about the low pressure system of the pulmonary arterial system. And at that point of time, I think everybody know about embolism, the type, but what you need to understand it in pulmonary system, when we're talking about pulmonary emboli, so it's a medical emergency and it's actually lead to sudden death, right? So the consequence of the emboli in the pulmonary system or respiratory system results in number one, respiratory compromise. First of all, if the emboli lodge into the pulmonary circulation, so the respiration, the exchange of gases is actually compromised. The function of respiratory system is actually compromised, because the emboli lodge, this area actually got deficient blood supply. So definitely the cycle goes in a way that no proper perfusion occur, and definitely there is an hemodynamic compromise. And third thing is pulmonary embolism will do is the compromise of the cardiac function, right? So the three consequences, compromising of the cardiac function is actually occur in, see, I will take your all questions in the last. So let it be, because it's a quite lengthy lecture. So we will first complete this lecture, and we will take your all questions in the last. And we all, I think, are connected with on the Facebook also. So if still we don't have time, we will talk, or you can message me there. System is depend or has a three reasons. You can also label them into two. First is respiratory compromise because of the non-perfusion ventilation, and number second is hemodynamic compromise. Because of first of all, because of the increased resistance, and it also affects the cardiac function. We will see later. So this is an important outflow chart, and it shows that pulmonary embolism actually causing an increased pulmonary artery pressure, right? If something is blocked within a pipe, so the back pressure is definitely going to increase, right? And when the back pressure is increased, so you can imagine that blood is actually coming from the right ventricle. And if the pulmonary artery exceeds its limit, the pulmonary artery pressure is exceeds its limit, obviously the back pressure actually resulted in the increased pressure in the right ventricle. So when the right ventricle exceeds its limit, it turn out to, so definitely back pressure is increased, right ventricle tension is increased, right ventricle demand is increased, right ventricle output is actually decreased, right? Okay, so there's a shift, there's a decrease. So finally there is a decreased preload, right? You should be, I think, I hope you know about the thing preload and afterload. Afterload is an output, preloaded what the blood is coming into the ventricle. So usually the left ventricle usually take things from the pulmonary system, because after oxygenating, all the blood will come into the left ventricle from where it propagated into the arterial system. So the main idea of this is that when pulmonary embolisms occur, the effect definitely in the ventilation perfusion system, plus it do have effect on the cardiac output. So whenever this occur, the cardiac output decrease. Finally, the cardiac output is decreased. And when the cardiac output is decreased, there is a decreased perfusion in the systems, right? And finally, there is a hypotension, or what we call in other word a shock. So the one consequence of the embolism is itself within the respiratory compromise, and the other part is that there is a hypotension or the low cardiac output or the cardiac dysfunction. So this is how the whole scenarios room around, and this whole thing which actually happened. So moving on. Obstruction of less than 20% of the pulmonary artery. See, the percentage, as you say, the atherosclerosis consequences. So here also, the percentage of the blockage actually decide which compromise or which function compromise should take in place. So if less than 20% of the pulmonary vascular bed is compromised, then bronchial supply, bronchial artery will compensate for the pulmonary embolism. If we are talking about less than 20%, that means if the 20% there, so because of the dual arterial blood supply, bronchial artery actually compensated. But if more than that, then it would be lethal. Then the next concept you need to understand in this is that the infarction, so lung can recover the hemorrhage but not infarctions, right? So suppose if some artery is blocked more than 20%, so the blood pressure is increased, and because of the pressure, the hemorrhage occur, right? See, because of the dual blood supply, when the hemorrhage occur, hemorrhage doesn't supply to the tissue because it need to have some capillaries which is go inside. You can also imagine, you can say that if the hemorrhage occur at the site of lodge, and if the hemorrhage occur at the site of block, so the blood is there, why wouldn't the tissue get the oxygen from the blood? But the blood is there, but it's all over speckles over there. It's not in the vessels, or it's not in the capillaries to go inside the tissue to supply. So that's why actually the infarction results, and infarction never recovers. So once infarcted, never recovered. So this is, we have discussed, if more than 20%, obviously they have a lethal consequences. So this is important. Large embolus causes sudden death. We have discussed that there are two types of, the size of the emboli actually decide at what part of it dislodge, and resulting in the lethal consequences. And the percentage, or the you can say the total caliper, how much the lumen is blocked, is also important. So if the large emboli cause lodge into the main pulmonary artery, it leads to electromagnetic dissociation with rhythm, but no pulse. This is very important. And this means actually, see, when there is a large thrombus, so the blood supply to the heart through the pulmonary vein is compromised. So the heart is there, heart is actually performing its function, but there is no blood or less blood in order to generate a pulse. I hope you understand this point, because this is important and quite confusing, that most of the time when we encounter a patient of the pulmonary embolism, so apart from the other features, which are pain, fever, and other consequences, chest pains, and then a shock, and then the cough, and sometimes hematemesis. Apart from that, there's a no pulse. And the reason behind is that if the pulmonary artery is compromised, or if the pulmonary artery has a dislodged emboli, and it actually block the whole blood supply, because it's a main artery. So, and we're talking about the large vein artery. So the lot of amount of blood is not going back into the heart for further proportion into the systemic circulation. So that's why there is no pulse. Acute cold pulmonary is, you can understand what is by definition. It is basically a right heart failure because of the pulmonary hypertension, or you can see a local increase in resistance to the blood flow because of the result of the pulmonary hypertension, and it results in right heart failure. So it's right heart failure secondary to the pulmonary diseases, all pulmonary vascular diseases. So this can be asked many times in exam. So you should be well know about what is the cold pulmonary. So I think it's a quite lengthy topic, and we are just reading a slide. So just let me ask you one question: that how do you make a difference on how do you make distinguish between cardiovascular death because of the cardiovascular arrest on the basis of signs and symptoms and the pulmonary embolism? How will you make a difference? What are the signs, or what sign difference between these two? So anybody, what are the different, see, dyspnea occur in both. If some coronary, I think this is, so dyspnea basically occur, it's not working here. So dyspnea, obviously the patient who have coronary insufficiencies or cardiovascular arrest do have a dyspnea, do have tachypnea, do have tachycardia, chest pain, mild fever, hypoxia. But cough and hematemesis are the two very important things which are actually encountered in the pulmonary diseases, right? And apart from that, there's a frictional rub terms, which is frictional rub term is actually used to detect, and it is very common for the pleuritis. So whenever there's a pleura affected, and most of the time the pleura do affected in that, so there's a frictional rub on examination. That is also a clue for identifying the pulmonary embolism. Second, decreased breath sound over the areas, because if some area is infarcted within the lungs, you can easily identify the area's infarction while auscultating. So you can also make a difference between either this and this, and wheezing obviously present in respiratory conditions. So in order to delineate either the patient is suffering from the cardiac pathology or suffering from the respiratory pathologies, you need to focus on the examination and try to identify the specific hints like frictional rub, like wheezing, right, like decreased breath sound in certain lobe of the lung or certain specific part of the chest wall. Apart from that, a cough and hematemesis and fever also. Fever, because most of the time it is superimposed infection there. So these are the clue or hint you can actually delineate that the person might suffer from some kind of pulmonary insufficiency or respiratory distress, which can be because of the embolism, right? Referred pain, heart do have a referred pain, but sometimes it's a very difficult to differentiate or identify clinically in a patient who is on the emergency bed. So it's very difficult to pinpoint a pain in a patient, in an emergency patient, or pointing or asking about the referred pain, or taking a detailed history on an emergency bed. So referred pain is one of the things, but yes, but other symptoms or signs related to pulmonary system which you detect on the examinations are important. So moving on, the risk factors which are important. So these are the risk factors which you should know, and because not because it is written, but because most of the time examiner or in OSCE they want you to write these down. So just try to remember right now that the prolonged embolization, obviously the prolonged embolized patient have a much chances of developing the thrombus. Second is trauma, hypercoagulative state or carcinomas, oral contraceptive, heart failure, pregnancy, and old age. These are very easy things. So just I'm for recalling you for you to retain in your brains that prolonged embolization, trauma, hypercoagulative state, carcinoma, oral contraceptive, heart failure, pregnancy, and old age. So at least remember 3 of them, because you are going to encounter such kind of questions in your exam. Okay. Okay. So we have discussed that the most from the deep vein, and most importantly above the knee joint, which includes popliteal, femoral, and iliac vein. So thrombi in these vessels often do not produce a local symptoms, right? When they are going to develop, and when it is happening, when they are actually developing, so no sign and symptoms were there. So it is very difficult to pick up on the initial stage. So thrombi in the superficial limb often produce pain, edema, varicose ulcers. Usually they do not embolize. So usually when in the question or in the exam, they ask you about which veins or are more prone to develop the thrombosis. So it's always a deep veins, and they cause pulmonary embolism in more than 90%, 90 to 95%. So 90 to 9% of chances of the thrombus which actually form in the deep vein can go and dislodge in the form of embolus in the pulmonary circulations and lead to a lethal consequences. So moving on. Now this is important. This is again a revision of a saddle thrombus, which is actually a shape of a saddle. And this is very important. This is also an example of a dislodged thrombus. You can see this kind of fibrin, which is actually present within the blood vessels. This is a blood vessel. Now, if one can ask how we can identify the blood vessels. So please appreciate this pink color of layer. This is basically a media layer, tunica media of the vessel. This is a very important. And within this, there is a fibrinous kind of material within it. And this is basically an embolus. Now we have discussed almost always you emboli from the deep vein thrombosis, greater than 95% of chances. High risk patient are severe burn patient, trauma patients suffer from trauma, fractures, hypercoagulability state, hospitalized patient. Clinically, 2/3 of the cases of pulmonary embolisms are not diagnosed before death. See, this is why this is important conditions. 10% acute uterine hospital death, complications, large emboli, sudden death from respiratory failures or acute chronic heart failure because of the cold pulmonary. When we discuss why cold pulmonary occur, cold pulmonary is basically a right side heart failure because of the respiratory failure or respiratory compromise. So the death because of the respiratory failure either, or because of the chronic heart failure, which is actually because of the cold pulmonary. And we have discussed that the small emboli are usually silent and doesn't cause much, but they are also important and need to detect. Okay. So This picture is very important. So I hope you understand. See, first of all, try to identify the vessel wall. So this is the vessel wall, and you can also you can also identify this is a lumen which contain a blood this pinkish colored dotted areas are the RBCs, right? These are the RBCs. So first of all, try to identify this is actually a blood vessels. So this is a lumen. You can easily identify this is a lumen. There's no big deal. Then after the lumen, you can just see what are these things. If you go and highlight these things, and you can see under high power view for a new one, so you can identify there's a lot of inflammatory things and their RBCs are present. So one thing is sure, this is a vessel lumen. Now within the vessel lumen, there's a much larger cells are present. And when I look first, it definitely look like an irregular cells with you can also differentiate these cells from the cancerous cells, because if they are cancerous cell, so they should have increased nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, which is not, and they should look like more hyperchromatic and should have an atypical mitosis. So these features are not there. So these are, don't confuse this with the carcinomas or other things. However, these are large, so one could think kind of things, but these are not nuclear cytoplasm ratio is not this much. They, as compared to what we see, this is an equal nuclear cytoplasm ratio. This diagram which I just draw is actually making you aware that these are, if you see such kind of cells with hyperchromatic, these are the carcinoma cells. So they are quite benign looking cells, and these are actually macrophages, right? And the macrophages doesn't have a proper cell boundary, and they do look like these kind of things. So within the lumen, if you see a cluster of the macrophages along with some irregular inflammatory, moderate amount of inflammatory cells, and so you should be thinking about, because it is not attached to any vessel wall, so definitely it's an emboli, sorry. And if these cells are attached to this wall, this is going to be a thrombus, but it's not. Now, second of all, just look at around here, and obviously this is not marked very good pulmonary parenchyma, but these are antiphotic pigments. You can also identify in order to identify which organ we are looking at. So at least if this is difficult for you, at least you should identify this is a lumen, this is the RBCs, and these are the clusters of the macrophages, which actually make them a label of a emboli within the vessel. So tests very important. Investigations are important. Because of the time, we are just going kind of for that. The complication of pulmonary. So the complication is number one infarction. Obviously, data wouldn't get the upper supply and the pulmonary hypertension, which further result either respiratory compromise or the cardiovascular. Right. So coming to infarction, the second thing, obviously, when we heard about the term infarction, we actually heard infarction depends on the urinary supply. So infarction in the heart definitely not occur if the lumen is not less than 20% of obstructed. So obstruction in percentage wise is very important. Greater than 70% or 80% is required for complete occlusion of a blood supply, and that actually leads to obstruction. Second is availability of the correlated blood flow. So there are certain organs we do not have a correlated blood supply, but here we do have. So the chances of infarction is much lower as compared to other. Then susceptibility of tissue to anoxia and rapidly vascular inadequacy, that are also related to the collateral blood supply. So moving on, This is the area of, this is a basic culprit, which is actually a wedge shape. I just want you to appreciate and understand this is a wedge shape. You should understand it because this is very important slide. So this is a wedge shape reddish area, which actually leading you that this is an hemorrhage because this is the rest of the the lung parenchyma. So just try to make a difference. This is a normal parenchyma, which is grayish brown, black in color. The black part is an enterocortic pigment. There are few holes which are bronchioles or bronchi and the vasculatures, and this is the basic area which actually showing reddish in which is actually reddish in color, which actually showing you an hemorrhage, right? So moving on, this is another picture which actually showing which turning from reddish, it turns into blackish in color, and that actually indicate that infarction has happened. So this is an infarcted area. Now this is the microscopy of an infarcted area, and see, this is not a very good picture, very clear picture, but if you first see and you need to identify which organ is that, first seeing around the surrounding tissue. So just this is the patchy, usually honeycombing like, not actually honeycombing like, but there are patchy clear lumen like areas. So it could be a blood vessel or it could be a lung. So blood is not there, so it's not a blood vessels. And if you highlight or if you see under microscope, you will easily identify the alveoli and the pneumocytes which are surrounding them. So first of all, try to identify what the tissue is. So this is the lung parenchyma, and within the lung parenchyma, there is a large necrotic area. See, this is only a fluid pink color material with inflammatory cells here. And this actually says that normal parenchyma is repartition and definitely is in ischemic infarctions, right? Again, this is, you can say this areas is basically alveoli, right? A thin wall alveoli which are lined by the pneumocytes. This is a normal, and this is, you can see the alveoli filled with blood. Number one is this hemorrhage occur, and within the hemorrhage, this area also have some inflammatory cells, fibrin, pinkish color of material. So this is an infarction. So this is how delineate what histology is it, right? So again, this area is normally lung parenchyma, and this one is here. I think the time is up, so we are just rushing on the things. I just want you to highlight these important things. This is very important. This is Hampsten sign, right? Most of the people and most of the students are confused with that. So this is a Hampsten sign, and please identify this triangular type of area, this one. And this is one of the sign which you will get in the pulmonary embolism or pulmonary infarction, right? The triangular area, which actually related to the pleura, and it's usually a wedge-shaped things. When you are going to decide either the etiology is cardiovascular system or pulmonary system, so the chest X-ray actually give you a hint if it comes with this sign. So this is a Hampton-Hum sign, which usually comes in the pulmonary infarction or if some patient is suffer from embolism. The second sign, which is not indicated in this picture but important, is the Paler sign. So this is the pulmonary artery, which is very much highlighted. You can see this is the pulmonary artery. This is it is known as Paler sign. So number one is Hampton sign, number two is Paler sign, and number three, which is not very clear in this picture, is the Westermarck sign. So go and check it out. What is Westermarck sign? Westermark. So just try to remember three signs: Hampton-Hum sign, Paler sign, Pallor, Paler sign, and Westermarck sign. This is a very important key factor to identify the pulmonary embolism or related to that. So, I hope you have very versed about the red and pale infarct. So coming to the system has a low pressure system and have a the average is, I think, 12 to 16 millimeter of Hg, but the range is up to 14 to 25 millimeter of Hg, right? So So greater than, so 25 is a hallmark. So greater than 25 millimeter of Hg at rest, actually indicating the patient is suffering from the pulmonary hypertension, right? So there's two busy slides. So I just want to highlight some important point. So just remember, greater than 25 millimeter of Hg pressure within the pulmonary system indicates that the patient is suffering from the pulmonary hypertension. Now, moving on to the important things are these, which we have actually discussed in the previous slides, that this muscular layer is actually thin in the pulmonary vascular systems. And when it, this is a normal systemic blood vessels of the normal systemic circulation. So it have a very thick wall coat of tunica media. So we have discussed, so that's why there are the chances of erythematous deposition. So we have discussed in the pulmonary system, this coat is quite thin, just to reduce, but if the disease occur or something wrong occurs, so this turn out to be more thicker and it will lead to the pulmonary hypertension, right? I think we have discussed this, so we are moving on to the next things which are important. Pulmonary hypertension is idiopathic as well as has a genetic factor. So try to remember one gene, which is BMPR2, right? Don't remember the locus, but at least remember that. So idiopathic pulmonary hypertension usually occur in the young patients, and the gene responsible is BMPR2, bone molding protein receptor 2. And the second, what you need to remember is a two-hit hypothesis phenomena, that one is inherited and one is modified or under the influence of environmental trigger. This actually results in this disease. So two-hit theory or two-hit hypothesis is applied here. So one is in one part is inherited mutation, mutation that actually leads to pulmonary hypertension. Moving on and there, and that actually leads to renal insufficiency, and the same antibody go into the lung and also deposit in the alveolar wall in the type 2 pneumocytes, and also results in respiratory compromise. So first thing you need to know about the Goodpasture syndrome. It is pulmonary hemorrhagic syndrome. Patient will come with hematemesis and with the renal complaints, signs and symptoms and findings, also renal complaint plus the respiratory system. And when you go into identify the cause, you will come across there is an antibody deposition which you can pick up on the fluorescence microscope, and you will see there is a deposition of some material within the basement membrane in the kidney, in the glomeruli, as well as in the lung. And when you further go on molecular techniques to identify that antibody, you will come across this is against the non-collagenous component of alpha 3. So just try to remember these two things. These two things will save you up in your exams, right? So diffuse, I think this is much important. This is a picture of lung parenchyma. Basically, it's showing you just, this is the last picture, lung parenchyma. These are the alveoli, and it is marked or it is lined by the pneumocytes. Most of them type 2 pneumocyte, type 1 pneumocytes. And within the alveoli, there should be a clear space for air, right? So that the exchange take place. But instead of air, instead of white thing, there are a lot of blood. There's a lot of RBCs these are very good RBCs you can identify and appreciate. So these are the very good RBCs which are actually filling diffusely in each and every alveoli. So when you come across such kind of picture under microscope, you will think of this is not an artifact. This is not the processing artifact. This is something pathology there. So in this kind of patient, when such antigen antibody deposit there, so that such kind of hemorrhage occur, and because of defect in the perfusion, so ultimately lead to respiratory compromise. So just it's nothing. If you come across this pictures, nobody expect you to write Goodpasture syndrome, but at least you should know this is the pulmonary hemorrhagic syndrome, or at least you know this is a alveoli which actually filled with blood. You should know that these are the alveoli or the lung parenchyma which actually filled with blood. So after that, you think when such kind of condition occurs, so there are only 3 syndrome. Number 1, we have just discussed a bit, that a Goodpasture syndrome. Number 2 is Wegener granulomatosis. Try to go and just find it out what is another name of Wegener granulomatosis, because it is obsoleted and some other name is given to that. So go and just do a little homework and just find it out what is another name of that. And the third is idiopathic pulmonary hemorrhagic syndrome, which is not very important, but try to remember 2 syndromes: Goodpasture syndrome and the Wegener granulomatosis, right? So this is it. Quickly, if you have any questions, you can ask me right now, or we can end it up the class. And don't worry, because this is a very haphazard lecture. So I will very happy to answer your questions. Please write me an email if you have any questions, or just how do we know if we are seeing X-ray is Hampton sign on consolidation in the lower lamina? Very good, very good. See, I just mark the pleura also, and I just also mark the thing in the pleura also. When the wedge-like area, see, number 1 is that from the sign and symptoms and from other examination, you got some kind of hints that patient is suffering from either the pneumonia consolidation or it's because of the blood fluid. Second thing, Hampton sign, I mark 2 other sign also, right? Number 1 is Paler sign and Westermarck sign. So Paler sign and Westermarck, if you are confused that this area is Hampton hum or a consolidation, look around the other things also. For example, like Paler sign, Westermann sign, and other sign and symptoms, and then correlate the things. So when you got 3 things or 3 signs, so definitely you are not seeing the consolidation, but this. Yes, ventilation perfusion mismatch definitely occur. You can see this is a very basic physiology thing, that whenever there is a deficient blood supply, so the dead space, what we call it dead ventilation space, is actually increased, which actually means that there is a ventilation perfusion mismatch occur in pulmonary embolism. Definitely, that is a basic pathology. That is a basic thing which actually leads to the further consequences like infarction and hemorrhage and further on. So obviously the ventilation perfusion is mismatch occur. Okay, I'll share you. I'll not right now, but I'll try to make sure that, because I'm very sorry for this. It's a quite lengthy lecture also, and it started late, so I will share you on your Facebook. Any other questions you can ask? I hope you don't have any other class. If you don't have, so I'm here. You can ask me a question. But if you have another class, so we need to close that up. So let me know if you have another class or not. So we will discuss. I have a time, so we can discuss it right now. You can open your mic if you want. Take more of your class. It's not in my hand, so okay. So I first of all tell me about if you have another class or not. Okay, so my email address Bushra bushra.sikandar@duhs.edu.pk, I guess. And you can also join on the Facebook page if you want. you can ask your colleague, and this is third year, I guess. Do you have another class? Please let me know if you have another class. I guess no one is responding. If you want to talk, you can raise your hand. I'll unmute your mic so you can discuss if you don't have another class. You don't have another class. Okay, you can discuss it. We have a time. So anything from the lectures, I'll happy to explain you again if you want anything. So those who want to ask question or those who want to clarify something can also open up, ask me to open their mics, or you can yourself open your mics and just ask me a question. I think I can wait for another 2-3 minutes for you. So there are a lot more questions because we're going into rush. If you are actually attentive, you can ask me a lot of questions on that. But good pasture syndrome is very, very important, and just go through each and everything from that. I will share this snaps of this PPT also on your Facebook page. So, but definitely if you're going to read about it from anywhere, from Robbins, or from web, so, but don't skip good pasture syndrome. This is a very important topic and interesting too. I hope I have some time to discuss about immunology because it's a very interesting thing. But if not, then go and read about yourself. It's very easy and very interesting. So never skip such kind of syndromic things because there's a high propensity of coming in the exam. So go and read about it. These slides actually we skipped. So pulmonary hypertension, how do we identify? I just want you to understand this because I skipped that slide because of the time. So if you have time, so I just want you to highlight these things. Pulmonary hypertension, see, first of all, try to identify the lumen, right? Try to first see the surrounding tissue. Always try to see the surrounding tissue within a slide. So this is the surrounding tissue, which have a hollow areas which is surrounded by these things, right? So first thought when you see the slide will definitely come, this is a lung slide, right? The lung parenchyma, because this is an air part, from here enter and here the perfusion occurred. This is the alveoli walls, which are very visibly surrounded by the pneumocytes. These are the pneumocytes, right? So within the parenchyma there is a one lumen things or one rounded like bodies, right? So when you see there is a little tiny lumen, if you see here there's a little tiny lumen which contain pink color of material, right? This is a lumen basically filled with the fibrin, or you can say another thing, maybe plasma. This is not very much clear in this picture, but some lumen is actually obliterated by the pink color of material. And when you see this is a lumen, this is rounded thing, this is pink color material, and when you see this thing, these are the cells which are normal, and these are encompassing or whirling around the lumen. So definitely when you focus on these three things, you come across, you are seeing a vasculatures. And when you further, if you focus on that, so you will observe that actually this coat is so much thick than it actually obliterate the lumen of this vessels, right? So this is basically increased thickening on hypertrophied smooth muscle wall of the vessels. So this occur definitely in the hypertension. And if we are seeing the lung parenchyma, so this picture is actually related to the pulmonary hypertension. So this is how you